Training camp is going to be ultra competitive for the Denver Broncos this season, and the running back position is up for grabs. We'll tell you why Javonte Williams faces a stiff uphill climb if he wants to secure a roster spot here in 2024. We'll break it down and much more here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Broncos Country, what's up? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. Thank you so much to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country who tune in, making us your first listen of the day every single day. And just a reminder, as always, you can get this show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. So make sure you subscribe or follow if you haven't done so already, so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team every single day, all year long, especially as we dive deeper into these NFL training camp position previews where we look at the biggest storyline for each player. We take a look at what every player in the depth chart at that position going to training camp brings to the table, and then we predict our 53-man roster at that position specifically. So thank you so much. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter from Mile High Sports, joined as always by Sayre Bedinger, site expert over there at predominantlyorange.com here. Sayre, really a lot to break into. Obviously, yesterday's episode, we really kicked things off here on our training camp preview series by focusing on the quarterback position, Bo Nix needing to take the reins here for the Broncos in the QB battle there. But there's another important position battle on the offensive side of the ball, and that's at the running back position. Really starting things off here, Javonte Williams going to be the main guy we talk about to really start this show here. He faces stiff competition here at training camp, a year removed after one of his worst seasons yet as a pro, coming off of obviously another injury there in terms of where his knee was at. The fact he was able to participate is impressive in and of itself. But because of that, now the Broncos, and we now look at the value of the running back position around the NFL and how teams are consistently moving on from guys, this is definitely a storyline as we look into NFL training camp. Javonte Williams, there's a lot of young guys. There's a lot of explosive guys behind him that are now vying for a spot to get a lot of carries this season.
Kind of a weird position for him to be in, because last year at this time, we were talking about how, man, it's like Samaje Perine, and we have no idea what anyone else is bringing to the table, including Javonte, who we weren't sure. I think a year ago at this point, he was kind of just starting to make that, miraculous comeback to the practice field. So, but even then, I think we were kind of like, I don't know what to expect from Javonte. Like, how much is he going to carry the ball this year? Obviously, he led the Denver Broncos in touches, one of only two running backs in the entire on any current AFC West roster right now that had over 1,000 yards from scrimmage last year, and it was still a down year for Javonte. I mean, the Broncos force-fed him the ball a lot of times, and notably, I think, Russell Wilson threw the ball to running backs a lot, and Javonte got a lot of targets that maybe he shouldn't have gotten, especially considering the way that, you could tell the explosiveness wasn't there. The yards after contact wasn't there. So it wasn't like he was really being a factor in the passing game or the running game, especially down the stretch. Cody, down the stretch of last season, from week 8 to the end of the year, that's a long, I say stretch of the season. I mean, that's a lot of the season. It's a good portion of the year. Javonte was barely able to crack 3 yards a carry. And it was tough to watch, because I think you and I both talked about it on the show a number of times. Like, what's wrong? Has he hit a wall from the injury? Are the Broncos using him too much? Like, is he hurting out there? What's going on? He wasn't the same guy that we saw in 2021, where every week was another Angry Runs segment with Javonte Williams, and he's dragging the Ravens defense, and he's dragging I think the Colts got dragged around a little bit by Javonte. The Cowboys got dragged around. I mean, everybody was getting dragged around by Javonte Williams in 2021. The complete opposite happened in 2023. And you got to give grace because he was coming back from the injury. But to me, the Broncos need Javonte to return to form almost more than any other player on this offense, because he's the only one on this roster that in recent years has carried a full workload in the running game.
And I think that's important, right? How do you get back to that? And I know you and I in one of the earlier episodes this offseason had talked about Well, could Denver's approach at running back change from a philosophical standpoint there? Could it be more of a by committee approach where it's like, all right, like we have three guys and we don't know who those guys are going to be. We'll obviously highlight who that could be in today's episode of the show. But ideally, could you maybe have a system with three running backs where you figure out it's more like whoever gets carries, it's more situational, right? Because remember at times last year, I think it was the Kansas City Chiefs game on Thursday Night Football, if I'm not mistaken, it was Jaleel McLaughlin who got the first carry. It was Jaleel who got the start overall here for the Broncos. And then we saw Javonte come in there. Look, and he was a guy, he also suffered an injury last season in the Chicago game. I think it was a quad injury, if I'm not mistaken there. So this is a guy who, had a lot on him. And I think that teams knew that Denver didn't have a sustainable enough passing game. So we did see teams defensively sell out against the run. I think it was like 16.7% of Javonte's overall snaps that he had in terms of carries. He saw a stacked box of 8 or more players last season, which, I mean, you think about it, okay, well, everyone looks at the number 16, like, that's not quite a bit. But when you factor in the large volume, I mean, everyone knew when Javonte was in, hey, we're just going to stack the box. And there were times last year, and I'd say if we're being objective, there were times where it seemed like Javonte was hesitant at times. There were times where it seemed like his vision wasn't there, like the cutback lane opened up and maybe he didn't see it, or he thought for a second too long on it and then it closed up there. I want to see him get back to a level of confidence that we saw a couple of years ago, and understand it takes some time. Like, look at Courtland Sutton, how long it took him to really find his confidence again after tearing his ACL in 2020, coming back. And like, it wasn't easy for him, right? And I think when you look at the running back position, you're absorbing the most contact, you're running the most, like you're going to get hit in the knee probably more so than anybody else. And so I think there is a factor of like, I have to get this out of my system from a mental standpoint. I would say this as well. Javonte didn't have, in my opinion, just from an observation standpoint, and I could be totally flawed in this, but it didn't look like he had the best offseason program as well. It looked like he's still trying to get back to himself. Hopefully that does happen here in training camp.
And there's a lot of speculation out there from people. I know I saw a report circulating on Twitter X earlier in the offseason that, people were saying, people took an opinion from Cecil Lammey, I think it was, and started running with like Javonte Williams could be on the chopping block this offseason. I know you and I have thrown that idea out there. I don't know how legitimate it is, Cody, but I think that certainly there's way better competition right now than there was a year ago. I think there's no denying that. For Javonte, you look at last year's next gen stats, Cody. I pulled up a list here of the percentage of plays in which he faced an 8-man box or more. It was down. It was way down from a year ago. So, I mean, it's not like he was consistently facing, these stacked loaded boxes like in his rookie year with the quarterback situation the way that it was. I know teams did challenge the Broncos to throw the ball downfield a little bit more, but it wasn't like Javonte was leading the league in facing an 8-man box or anything like that.
No, Derrick Henry was.
Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey, Gus Edwards. I mean, these guys who, when they're out on the field, teams know they're getting the ball most likely. So it was really disappointing from that vantage point. And I think when you look at yards over expected, like that was another area that Javonte really struggled. I mean, it was negative, in minus 83 in yards over expected. So it's like you said, was he seeing the holes right? And vision has been a consistent question mark for him since his days at North Carolina. I mean, people forget Javonte's a former linebacker, right? So, I mean, there are a lot of factors that go into his development at the position. To sum it up, in my opinion, Cody, if he doesn't return to form this year, I don't think he's going to be with the Broncos much longer.
Yeah, and look, that's the unfortunate nature of the running back market in today's NFL. I mean, you see teams that don't want to pay running backs, really, unless you're Derrick Henry. I mean, that's the prime example. And obviously, Josh Jacobs just got paid this offseason. But the reality is teams are looking to move on from running backs because it's like, hey, they are absorbing the most contact. They have the most wear and tear probably of any position on the entire field. And you're expecting them to produce the most. But at the same exact time, what's their shelf life going to be? Like, that's going to be a huge thing. As we've talked about, we've seen the NFL kind of transition to say like, hey, like running backs were even thinking about forming a union themselves last year because of the contract situations and how the position is now valued. That to me is crazy. So Javonte has this. I think that's why it's an uphill climb. That's why he does have stiff competition. The Broncos made moves. They got in Audric Estime. They have, obviously Blake Watson. They have Jaleel McLaughlin, Samaje Perine still on the roster, Tyler Badie, a carryover. There's a lot of guys that we're going to talk about in terms of what do each of these guys bring to the table. in this running back competition that gives them the best chance to maybe make the roster. We'll break that down and much more here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp, and comparison is the thief of joy, and it's easy to envy other people's lives. It might look like they have it all together on their Instagram or their social media, but in reality, they probably don't. Therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have so you can start living your best life. Life doesn't come with an instruction manual on how to overcome certain things that may pop up in your life, and that's why it's important to share your perspective and talk with somebody who's unbiased on your life. I've utilized BetterHelp therapy in the past, and it was beneficial for me. I think there's a lot of benefits out of using therapy because I don't always have the answers, and it's nice to be able to get some tools that I can use in my day-to-day life to deal with stress, anxiety, depression, things that do pop up for me consistently. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon.
The running back competition is going to be one of the most fierce competitions of Denver Broncos training camp in 2024. When the pads come on, you can expect these guys to be out there with a chip on their shoulder. Cody and I are going to break down this position group and exactly what each of these guys brings to the table for the 2024 season here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. But want to say thank you and give a shout out to every single one of you everyday listeners of Locked On Broncos. We appreciate you so much for making us part of your day every single day, free and available everywhere that you listen to podcasts, as well as, if you're not already, go subscribe over there on YouTube. I mean, we're close to 13,000. We're going to get 15,000 this year, Cody, subscribers on YouTube. I believe it. We're going to manifest it. Let's see it happen. So go subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. And if you're not already, ramp up your listening to every single day. Get us at the top of the algorithm. Throw us on when you're in the car or when you're on the treadmill, whatever you're doing. We appreciate you for doing that. And if you haven't done so already, make the switch from whatever sports show you watch on TV, flip over to YouTube and turn on Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel that's programmed for you with local experts bringing you the biggest stories, can't miss analysis, opinions, and news that you want 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's talk about the running back position group. I mean, I know there's a lot of names this year. Last year, there wasn't so many names. I think there were unknowns with Jaleel McLaughlin and Javonte Williams coming back. This year, there's not enough roster spots for all the guys that we think could potentially make the team. I saw somebody posted on, I can't remember where it was, Cody, so I can't give proper credit, but earlier this offseason, they were looking at all the different combinations of, if the Broncos keep 3 running backs, here's the different combinations of 3. And there's a lot of them. There's so many different, that makes sense, right? And it's not just like, man, this guy needs to have a good camp. I think you could justify a lot of different groupings of this position group. But let's start off by talking about Samaje Perine, third down running back extraordinaire, 2-minute drill king for this team last season. Does Samaje still have a role on this Denver Broncos roster in 2024?
I think he still has a great opportunity to do just that. I think the biggest question you have here, Sayre, with all the other moves that Denver has made, I mean, financially, they can move on, save some more cap space. I don't know how important that is to them, or is the price tag point not enough? To be honest with you, it just depends. What does Sean Payton envision for the running back usage? Like, the fact that there's so many backs on this team right now, Sayre, tells me that Sean is making the run game a little bit more of a bigger emphasis than it has been. And what is the best thing? He even alluded to this after the team drafted Bo Nix. What is the best ally for a young quarterback? It's having a good defense, but it's also having a strong run game, which the Broncos last year, really outside of Jaleel McLaughlin, didn't have a strong run game. Like, Samaje didn't really have as big enough of an impact as a running back, but he did as a pass catcher out of the backfield. I mean, you could thank him and probably give him a couple of MVPs in terms of some games last season because of all his catches on third down that helped keep the drives alive, that helped set up maybe a game-winning field goal by Will Lutz against the Buffalo Bills on that Monday Night Football game. Samaje was very valuable to the Broncos out of the backfield as a runner You didn't see as much as maybe you wanted to last year from him. So does he have a little bit more of a carved out role there in that regard? And look, it's not just going to start with him. Like Samaje, obviously the veteran guy of the room, he's got a lot of experience dating back to college. I think if I'm not mistaken, he still owns the college football rushing record for a single like in a game. Like wasn't over 600 something yards rushing in a game, if I'm not mistaken, that he had there.
It was something crazy. Yeah, I can't remember, but it was something wild.
Yeah, so Perine's, I mean, and he's floated around a couple other teams. He's played with Joe Burrow. He's played with the Cincinnati Bengals. Like, you can't ignore his veteran experience and the veteran factor that he's going to bring to the table here. But I also think another thing as well, he's got to have an impact in the run game a little bit more. Like, I love the fact that he's impactful in the 2-minute drill as a pass catcher out of the backfield, but you need him to be not just a guy who can catch passes out of the backfield. You need a guy who can run the ball sustainably. Can he become that? Is a huge question. But then that also leads into, okay, well, the Broncos this offseason in the NFL draft, 5th round, they had a higher round, what was it, 3rd round grade on Audric Estime. They drafted him, and granted, he didn't participate much in the OTA's offseason program because he had a knee scope. He should be ready to go for training camp, but he's a big bruising body that runs through guys. Like, it puts, I think, everything into question here with the additions that they've made. Like, I think this is why you want competition to elevate that room. Like, Samaje has to be better in the run department, but if you bring in a guy like Audric Estime who can do just that, like, you're younger, you're getting financially cheaper options there. That's the unfortunate way that the NFL thinks when it comes to evaluating players at this position.
Yeah, and to me, Cody, you know what another big factor is for these guys is ball security. I know that there were a lot of clutch plays made by Samaje Perine last year, but there were a number of times when he had a little case of the butterfingers as well. And I know that Javonte had, a couple of fumbles last year, or at least one fumble that I can remember last year, and he's had some fumble issues in the past. So to me, this is another thing, is ball security. Can you trust a guy like Audric Estime with ball security as a rookie? I think that's another major factor here, that if he's going to get an expansive role early on, that would be maybe the number one determining factor, is can you hold on to the ball? If we give the ball to you 200 plus times, how many times are you going to let it go? So that's going to be key in determining whether or not he can carve out a role above any of these other guys. What about Jaleel McLaughlin, too, for his second NFL season? I mean, we talk about how much Javonte made an impact on the offense last year, but I mean, Jaleel McLaughlin was top 5 on the team in yards from scrimmage. He obviously was second on the team with 107 total touches. In terms of yards per touch, Cody, he was right beneath Samaje Perine at the running back position. So he's a valuable weapon, and he's somebody that the Broncos want to get involved. I think his spot on this roster is almost non-negotiable at this point.
No, I agree with you. I think if we had to talk about anybody in this position room right now that I feel like is safe a little bit early on, and this may come across as a hot take, but I agree with you. I think Jaleel McLaughlin is the guy who is safe right now for the Broncos. I think Sean Payton has a lot of value, has a lot of plans to use him effectively this upcoming season. I'm excited to see what that looks like here. But I'll also say this as well, Sayre. Like, when you look at all these guys, like for Jaleel, like, he's put on some muscle mass. Like, he's gotten a little bit bigger this offseason. He's expanded that he wants to do more. He's demanded that Sean Payton give him more in terms of a workload. He wants to be able to handle all that. And Sean said that he's handled it pretty well. And on top of that, when you look at consistency from OTAs to mandatory minicamp, he was the one running back that stood out on a daily basis and was consistently good at what he was asked to do. So that factor, I think, plays in well. We'll talk about Blake Watson, who really emerged as a young guy, I think, later on towards OTAs and the end of mandatory minicamp. Had a couple of runs that would have went untouched for big gains. Caught a touchdown pass from Jarrett Stidham in the red zone period on the final day of mandatory minicamp. And I was also getting involved on special teams. He's a young guy, but he's also in a position that Jaleel was in last year, and now he's going to have to go out, and he looked good in OTAs and minicamp. Go do that in training camp. Go do that in the preseason and make it undeniable for the team to move on from you when they have to make roster cuts there. And then there's Tyler Badie, who really, honestly, is kind of that not talked about enough guy who's been really under the radar, has been on this team, on the practice squad for a couple of years now. He is another name I think that Broncos fans will have to keep an eye on. Like, he's going to be a guy that doesn't go down swinging. Like, he's going to fight and claw his way to maybe make the roster this year. And the fact that Sean and the Broncos brought him back, I think, is a good sign there. So a lot of competition. I mean, you're looking at Javonte, Jaleel, Samaje, Blake. You're looking at Tyler Badie, Audric Estime. Like, this is probably the most loaded room at running back that we've seen on a Broncos roster in quite some time in terms of number of guys. How many question marks are there? I don't think there are as many as we thought maybe last year. And I think that's a good sign for them as competition ramps up here going forward here. But one thing we are going to do here as we continue to dive deeper into our training camp position preview, you know what comes with that, Broncos country? We are going to predict our 53-man roster. Sayre and I are going to share our thoughts as to how many running backs we think Denver keeps on the 53, and we're going to share who we think they are going to keep on the 53 on today's episode of the show. Broncos country, today's episode of Lockdown Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there, FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. And look, I love sports. You love sports. Sports brings you and I and many other people together, and I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games on, and that means that sports, they're not sports in the way that you and I would like them to or have hoped for. But FanDuel, they let me keep sports going whenever I want because all I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. Now, obviously, you can bet on Major League Baseball because their season is in full swing, but the NFL season is coming up, and I personally love to dive deep into NFL futures. Try to imagine how things are going to go before the season even begins, like division winners. I put a parlay together where I predict every division winner, and that gives me a chance to win big if all my predictions or picks come true. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. Once again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer today because FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, we'll dive into predicting the 53-man roster in terms of the running back position. How many players do they keep there? Who do they keep there? We're going to share our thoughts. And look, as always, Broncos country, we want to hear from you. Whether you're watching on YouTube or you're listening wherever you get your podcast, make sure you share with us who you think is going to make the 53-man roster for the Broncos at running back specifically. And do us a favor, if you haven't done so already, subscribe or follow so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team. Sayre, we've highlighted all the players at the running back position in today's episode. Now it's time to kind of break it down a little bit early before training camp even begins. How do we see this position room playing out, considering everybody stays healthy? And more importantly, who and how many are the running backs that are going to be on the 53-man roster week 1 when the Broncos take on the Seattle Seahawks?
This is when I'm putting together roster predictions. This seems to be maybe the hardest one to do because I don't know, are the Broncos going to keep 3 or 4? And if they keep 4 running backs, that means they're keeping ultimately 5 because Michael Burton factors into the equation, I think, still, Cody. I don't know that necessarily. I think that he's probably a lock to make the roster based on the fact that Sean Payton likes that role in his offense and utilizes it pretty consistently. So it makes it hard to project because you tend to want to keep 4 guys at this position. Either your team, hey, we're keeping the experience with Javonte and Samaje and Jaleel, and then we're adding Estime to the group, and we want to keep that, we want to keep those guys and load up the room. Or you're kind of like me and you're like, I don't hate the idea of throwing Blake Watson in there and maybe moving on from somebody like Samaje Perine. But it becomes an impossible Sudoku puzzle if the Broncos only keep 3 guys, because in that case, then if the Broncos are limiting themselves to 3 backs, to me, I think it's going to be Javonte Williams, Jaleel McLaughlin, and Audric Estime. That's the way that I see it happening if they only keep 3. If they keep 4, that really changes the equation because then I think you have the luxury of keeping Samaje if you want, or if Blake Watson has a dynamic preseason or Tyler Badie has a dominant preseason, you could keep one of those guys additionally. But where do these roster gymnastics change over, are they keeping 3 quarterbacks? Are they going to keep 7 receivers? Are they keeping 10 offensive linemen? Are they keeping 5 edge guys? I mean, everything factors into whether or not the Broncos, what they do at other spots, to whether or not they can keep 4 running backs. So I don't know, but I think if it's 3, that would be my 3, would be Javonte, Jaleel, and Estime making this team.
That's kind of where I'm leaning right now as well. Look, I think the fullback position is very important to Sean Payton. Michael Burton is going to make this roster no matter what. He doesn't really have any competition there from what I have seen at OTAs and minicamp. Running back, you have to give that, like, I think the Broncos and Sean, they want to do right by Javonte. And I think they want to see, like, I think they believe that Javonte can get back to who he was. Javonte's going to be there. You and I talked about it in the last segment. Yeah. Jaleel McLaughlin, in my opinion, I don't think his roster spot is really in question, even though that the competition is going to be like anybody can do it. He's too electric of a player. And I guarantee you, let's just hypothetically say, if Jaleel McLaughlin were somehow released by the Broncos, I guarantee you a team like maybe San Francisco, like a powerhouse team, would find a way to pick him up. Kansas City might even do it. And then all of a sudden we're sitting here like, wow, Isaiah Pacheco and Jaleel McLaughlin are tearing up the Denver Broncos. Like, that would be nightmare fuel. The Broncos aren't going to let that happen. Sean Payton values Jaleel way too much. Javonte, Jaleel, those are the two guys. And I'm with you. I think Audric Estime is going to be there. So that means that they move on from Samaje Perine and he'll land elsewhere. But I will give my prediction here too. They will bring back Blake Watson. They will bring back Tyler Badie onto the team's practice squad. I think if that were how the roster kind of formulates itself. Now, my question here for you is, now that we've predicted what our 53-man roster was going to be and we're in alignment here, how do you see the usage between these three backs kind of playing out? I'm going to stick with the standpoint that I had earlier in the offseason, that I don't think it's going to be one guy's going to be the bell cow. I think you're going to see situational usage in terms of the running backs this year versus one guy getting a bulk of the carries.
Yeah, there's no doubt that Javonte got too many, 264 total touches last year, and the efficiency at 3.8 yards per touch was simply inexcusable from the team's perspective to give him that. And so if you do move on from Samaje, that's opening up 103 touches from last season. I think if you subtract from Javonte and you add in whatever Samaje leaves behind, that you're looking at least 400, almost 500 touches between running backs from last season. I don't know if it'll necessarily be that heavy. I would like to see something like 200 for Javonte, 150 for Jaleel, and whatever's left over to give that to Estimate and ride the hot hand as much as you can. So depending on where the Broncos land in terms of how, remember last year we talked about them abandoning the run a lot of times. Well, your running back still ended up ranking in the top 5, all 3 of them in the top 5 on the team in pass game targets. So that was an extension of sorts, but it wasn't overly effective. So it'll be interesting to see how different that is this year compared to last year. I also wonder if there's a chance too, Cody. I know I saw Ryan Edwards throw it out earlier this offseason. Like, if the Saints move on from Alvin Kamara, did the Broncos call? Because we know Sean Payton loves the guy. I just wonder if that's ever part of the equation. You never know. But look, Broncos country, I think ultimately you have to be effective and efficient with the way you use Javonte, not just shove the ball down everybody's throat with Javonte, and split up these carries more so evenly than you did last year.
And I think that's exactly where Sean is going to lie, because, I mean, Denver's run game last year wasn't good enough. And how much of that is going to be blamed on the quarterback play, I don't know. But Sean has made every claim this offseason, and even when he drafted a rookie quarterback, saying, like, we need to be able to run the football, because you can't put all the pressure on a young quarterback. You can't put all the pressure on a quarterback anyways. Like, you need to have sustainability. Like last year when everything was going wrong for the Kansas City Chiefs and they're like, oh, their receivers suck, like, that was a lot of pressure on Patrick Mahomes' shoulders. And granted, Patrick Mahomes is who he is, but where do they find some relief? It was in the run game with Isaiah Pacheco, who was running all over everybody. Like, people were saying he runs like he's trying to bite people. Like, that is where things were at there. And it happens to some of these really good teams. You look at the Baltimore Ravens, and they're probably the best rushing offense right now in the entire NFL based on last year. Now they added Derrick Henry to the freaking mix. Like, you got to be kidding me. Now it's like, all right, you have to be methodical in how you run and how you wear teams down. If you're trying to just put Javonte out there just to try to wear a defense down, it's not just going to come from him. Like, you're going to have to obviously have the physicality. And if Javonte gets back to his old self, running downhill, carrying off a couple of big gains where you're dragging a defender on a couple of drives. Oh, and then now you bring in Jaleel McLaughlin, who's so dang fast. He gets to the outside and up the sideline. You're like, the defense is like hands on their knees already. Like, they're gassed. Like, that's where you have to be. You have to wear teams down methodically, and you have to be smart about it. I think that's where Sean is going to have a little bit of a difference this year in comparison to last year. And I think that's where Pete Carmichael is probably going to come into the mix as his senior assistant. I think Pete's going to be up in the box, if I'm not mistaken, and you're going to have that brain trust. They're really trying to figure out, how can we get this offense to sustain? In my opinion, I know everyone's focused on quarterback. Quarterback's going to be so important for Denver, but if the Broncos are going to have success this year, Sayre, it is going to come from a sustained run game, and everything else will open up. They haven't been able to get to that for quite some time. maybe this is the year that they do that. Certainly that is our hope here in Broncos Country. But with that said, that will wrap up today's episode of the show here, Broncos Country. We want to hear from you, your thoughts on the running back position, the training camp battles that we are going to see. How do you think the 53-man roster will shape out at this position specifically? If you're watching on YouTube, let us know in the comments. If you're listening wherever you get your podcasts, make sure you let us know on your favorite social media platforms where you can interact with Sayre and myself. But for all you everydayers out there, here's what you can expect for tomorrow's episode of the show. Courtland Sutton is back. He's the top dog in the Broncos wide receiver room. His spot is safe, but there's so much competition when we talk about a deep but unproven wide receiver room. How do we think it's going to play out? We'll break down the training camp position preview of wide receiver on tomorrow's episode, Locked On Broncos.